Well, good afternoon and welcome to another press briefing with the latest situation in relation to COVID-19 so far as it affects the bailiwick. I think I want to start with really reminding everybody what the strategy has been behind us dealing with a pandemic such as we are now faced with. And of course this has been quite publicly stated by the World Health Organization as being test, and test again. And of course the contain policy relies on that community testing as well. One of the issues that has naturally come to the attention of the public, because it's been happening elsewhere, of course, is around educational institutions and what part they play in relation to this, the spread of this disease. And it's apparent that the closing of schools as well as universities around the world has become a widely common practice in response to the pandemic, and acts as one of what Nikki and the public health profession would describe as a more extreme non-pharmaceutical intervention. It's worth noting that some of the most effective such interventions so far have not actually utilised school closures as a measure at all. Most notably amongst this group, of course, is Singapore, which I referred to earlier in the week at our last press briefing as perhaps being the jurisdiction which is obviously earlier into this, but is the closest to us in terms of the strategy. And yet the rise of cases in Singapore was steady and without the exponential growth observed elsewhere. And I think that is of note, as it's a strategy of community-based measures proportionate to the transmission risk, and it has proven effective. Undoubtedly, it has proved effective in containing spread. The community level approach in Singapore has been focused on social responsibility, and life was encouraged to, wherever possible, continue as normal, albeit with some precautions. And again, you will have heard me say that in the last 2 days, on both Tuesday and Wednesday, that we want life to carry on as much as possible within the bounds of this new sense of normality, subject always, of course, to the proviso of adhering to public health advice in relation to precautions. Importantly, schools remained open in Singapore rather than implementing precautionary measures such as the reduction of mass assemblies and so on. So it does suggest that actually closing schools is not a necessity, even when facing community spread of the disease. However, the entire basis of the success with which Singapore tackled and contained its pandemic, despite existing community spread, was due to the high volume of testing in conjunction with the very wide and effective contact tracing. And currently, the experience that we have is that we are having a lack of rapid and consistent testing available at scale for us in Guernsey, and there is a growing backlog of testing. And of course, that shouldn't be a great surprise because of the scale of the pandemic, particularly, of course, as it now impacts the UK. And the position which public health have found themselves in is that it's no longer possible for them to conclusively say and advise us where we are actually in relation to this disease. And I think that judgment has, I think, further been supported by some evidence which has been reported to public health from GPs with patients who are presenting with some symptoms but don't have a travel history, albeit again I will leave Dr. Brink to explain the significance of that in the context of late winter season flu and so on. So there's a judgment to be made. And the issues, I think, further exacerbated when recognising the additional residents who, of course, have now returned to the island or are returning, students in particular, of course, who may well have potentially been exposed to COVID-19 either while travelling through areas of high infection or having come from an area of high infection. So in conclusion, the Medical Officer of Health has recommended that we take further steps which have been considered by the Civil Contingencies Authority today, that we adopt an immediate pause in relation to education until it is possible to ensure an adequate level of testing amongst the community to assess where we stand regarding the potential existence of any community-based spread. And once we have a on-island capability, which of course is in the process of development, and again I will leave Dr. Brink and indeed Deputy Heidi Salisbury to speak a little bit further about that. And once we've established that capability and established that there is no community spread, it would then be appropriate to then reopen the schools for education in accordance with the measures which have been adopted in Singapore. If we then discover later that actually there is community spread, the decision can then be made to extend the closure of schools beyond the current anticipated end of the Easter holiday period, until such time at least as the spread has diminished or mitigated. So in summary, really, the situation with regard to the continued containment of COVID-19 in the bailiwick has changed significantly over the last few days. Again, that will come as no surprise with this rapidly evolving situation, which has quite literally changed day to day and brings us together so regularly. The UK policy for COVID-19 testing has changed to focus on hospital-based testing, and we actually do need to assess the impact of that on ourselves, and that again will be a further matter for Dr. Brink and all of her colleagues to consider and provide us with further advice on, so that we can make appropriate decisions in the days ahead. This may be appropriate for the delay stage, this change in policy for the UK to adopt hospital-based testing, but of course, as we've said before, it's not actually appropriate for where we are in the phase of this disease, which of course remains, and it still remains today, containment. So with there being a high probability that there may be some issues in relation to or further pressure in relation to the resources of testing for us in the bailiwick, and with us having no on-island testing, then we do have to consider the impact on our strategy and quite as you would expect, to adapt and flex accordingly. The absence of community testing with some 70 results are outstanding, so there's a backlog now, so we're not getting results as speedily as Dr. Brink and her medical colleagues would like, means that we can't really be quite sure. She's unable to advise us with certainty that we are still in that containment phase, and therefore with that uncertainty we are now, the Civil Contingencies Authority has taken the decision and will provide further information in relation to this, that we should now pause teaching in all schools from close of play tomorrow, Friday, for all states and private schools until we are able to establish the burden of infection within the bailiwick, if indeed that proves possible. So effectively what we're doing is bringing forward the end of term. This is not the indefinite closure of schools, which is being seen in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. And we are expediting the development of on-island testing. And again, I will leave that to Dr. Brink and others. What I will also say is that provision will be made for the childcare of key workers and for children with special educational needs, and further information will follow in relation to those issues later tomorrow afternoon. I think for me that's probably enough. What we propose to do is Heidi is going to talk a little bit more now about some of the other issues which are giving us pause for thought in terms of what future measures may or may not be appropriate. Dr. Brink is going to give a bit of an update on where we are generally and speak a little bit more about the basis of the recommendation from her team. We've also felt that it would be useful to have Rory Hardy here as the head of law enforcement to speak a little bit more about the experience of the effective closure of the border from midnight last night, with of course the requirement for anybody who now enters, unless they are one of the exemptions, to self-isolate. And he will explain to you the landing card which is now required to be completed and what experience the law enforcement team have had at the border. We felt that would be useful to update you and the public. So I think what I will do is if we go through those series of comments, and then as before we will open it up to questions. So Heidi.
Thanks, Gavin. As Gavin said, the change in the UK policy, as well as the increasing delay in getting test results back, has led to the decision to bring forward the end of the Easter term for schools. But that also leads to other considerations from the wider community. And we know that we've got a fair few students who have come back, or are coming back to the island. And we know that it's all, we have no idea at the moment whether we have community seeding or not. So we need to think about wider social gatherings and what other more precautionary measures we need to take. As I say, we have been taking a very cautious approach that has held us in good stead until now. And it's, as Gavin said, the importance of testing. If we haven't got that testing and the results, we need to be even more cautious. So that is leading us to have considerations in terms of whether pubs, clubs should remain open, and also more stricter social distancing measures. We haven't made those decisions now. There's further work being done as we speak to assess quite what we need to do. At the same time, we know we want to keep the island running as normally as we can, but we need to make sure that we can pick out those areas of greatest risk that could impact on greater community seeding. So this is just to advise that tomorrow we'll be providing more details in respect of other further measures to take a precautionary approach.
Okay, thank you, Heidi. Nikki.
Thank you. Thank you for having the opportunity to explain the decision making today. I think it's really important. From the onset, we said that we would have a cautious and evidence-based approach. So cautious because we are aware of the limited resilience within our bailiwick, but also evidence-based. So we've tried to underpin every decision we've made with evidence and also explain it to all of you, because all of you are part of this journey. So from our perspective, over the last 24, 48 hours, I've become increasingly concerned that I no longer have a sound evidence base to inform the decision making. So from today, we have some 70 tests that are outstanding. We don't know how many positive results we'll have in that, if any indeed. They could all be negative. But the key core attribute, or the core part of our containment policy, is the rapid identification of tests. Once you've identified them, that person, you self-isolate. Now, obviously, anyone who's been tested is self-isolating, so we have that part under control. However, having said that, the next really important thing is contact tracing. So if you're waiting 3-4 days for a result, you can't get that timely contact tracing done. And that contact tracing is really important for the onward transmission. So from our perspective, what we're saying is that this is cautious. It is looking for an evidence base to underpin our decision making. And what we're not looking for is an indefinite closure of schools. This is a pause and assess. So we're going to pause, we're going to assess the situation, then we can come back to our community and say, we now have tested X number of samples and we found X positive, so that's going to inform our decision making. Or actually, We haven't found any new positives. So we think on balance it's reasonable for schools to go back. So what we're asking for is your support as we pause and just give us a chance to assess what's going on. We always said to parents we would have the best interests of their children at heart and we would consider that carefully. But also a lot of those children will be seeing members of their family and so on. So we're looking at that whole onward transmission. So really important from our point of view. Our testing strategy has always been twofold. So the first is to look at new cases being introduced, and that's been from everyone returning to the island, or now everyone returning to the island who developed symptoms suggestive of COVID-19. But we've also been looking for community seeding within our hospital, and that's basically our hospital testing where we've been testing independent of travel. And we don't have evidence of community seeding in our hospital cases, but that's only one arm. So we can't be clear and can't be sure that we don't have evidence of community seeding, and that's what we want to look for over the next few weeks. We're hoping that we'll have community testing, on-island testing up and running, so we're looking at trying to bring that on as soon as possible. We're having people seconded from different departments to try and get this going as a matter of absolute priority, because back to the Director General of the World Health Organization, testing, and we'll be able to make informed and evidence-based decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Rory.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. Bailiwick Law Enforcement has identified its key responsibilities as this situation develops. Our first priority is to help minimise the risk to the public by assisting the public health services contain and restrict the spread of this virus. Staff at the borders and across the bailiwick, including the other islands of Alderney and Sark and Herm, will work in partnership with our health officials to support this objective. The challenge facing public services is not underestimated by law enforcement, and we will be standing side by our partners in health. The public has a key responsibility in playing their part in defeating the threat up to our communities. I would ask all islanders to take time to fully understand the guidance and adhere to it without hesitation. It is vital and in the wider public interest that we all follow the guidelines from public health as long as necessary. I would like to draw attention to the work that we've started on the borders from this morning. Any individuals coming into our islands from outside, including Jersey, are being met by officers from the border agency. The stance we're taking is about giving them clear information as to what is expected with regard to the 14-day isolation. Staff at the borders are also confirming the identity of everybody coming in and ensuring that we have contact details in case further medical advice or information needs to be passed to them. The feedback I spoke to people this morning. I had feedback from the public, and the initial indications were people were very appreciative of not only being made fully aware, but the steps being taken by this jurisdiction to protect the island from the threat of the virus. And I'm very grateful for the public cooperation we saw at all the ports today. Another priority for us is to keep staff working within law enforcement safe. We've made some minor adjustments to our counter services, and also the staff working at the controls this morning at the harbour and at the airport are taking precautionary measures to ensure that they protect themselves from any potential infection. Again, we thank the public for their cooperation in how they've managed that situation. A further aspect I'd like to highlight as success has been the Joint Emergency Services Control Centre and the call handling suite that's been set up. They are receiving in excess of 300 calls a day, and staff are not only managing business as usual in the normal call handling facility, but also handling the additional capacity that is being generated by the COVID-19 call centre. I'd like to express my public thanks to them. The final point I'd like to say is please do not pay attention to speculation or rumour, particularly upon social media, which can be very busy and can be extremely misleading and wholly inaccurate. Please focus on the government and other such media feeds, such as the Guernsey Police Facebook site. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. So I think we'll open it up to questions. Who'd like to start, please?
Well, first of all, how long will it take to get testing facilities available?
We're expecting the imminent delivery of a key piece of kit over the next few days, and what we're hoping within a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, possibly longer. There are some unknowns with regard to that because we also are some reagents that we need. So we'd normally set up a new assay in 3-4 months. So it's been pushed on to a very tight time frame. The importance of testing is that we essentially can control our own testing programs. So we can also ramp up and do a lot more testing. So our plan, if testing comes on board, if we're able to get it on island, is to really broaden out our testing policies over the Easter break, and so that we've got a really good handle of what's going on in the community. And from my perspective, it's a pause and assess. What I'd really like to emphasise is that we're not closing the schools indefinitely like other jurisdictions have done, is we're asking the community to work with us while we ascertain at a very precise level what's happening in our community.
Okay. Next.
Anyone who's recently been tested, what happens to their results? So there are a number waiting results back.
And we can only apologise for that delay. It's frustrating for them. It's frustrating and worrying for us because if someone does come up positive, as I say, we're then delayed in our contact tracing processes. And all of this has informed our decision making. And I think most of the team within my team and across many members of the States of Guernsey had a sleepless night last night as we tried to think of all of the pros and cons of every intervention. And sometimes we have to be definitive, be brave and say, well, this is the situation, we can't provide assurance, so let's pause and assess where we are and try and make more evidence-based decisions. And that's been consistent in what we've tried to do, and we've shared that evidence from the beginning because we're all in this together, and it's only going to work if we all work together.
I think it's important to add that the testing might change what we do. I mean, if the testing results come back and we say there's no community seeding, well, that's fine. We can relax the restrictions that we're putting in place now. It's always about matching what our situation is and what is appropriate for us now. So we're doing this now because we haven't got the evidence at the moment, but as soon as we have, we can then make the decisions to try and make things more normal as they can be.
Just to be clear, do you mean that the tests that you're waiting for, are they still going to be processed in the UK?
Yes, I believe
yes,
they will be.
At the present, they will be, yes.
And we're looking at other options in the UK as we speak. So it's not as if we're just hanging around waiting for those results. There is a lot of work going in the background to see what more we can do and how we can expedite some of those tests.
Are you able to expand on that, the other options that you're looking at?
In terms of
testing?
In terms of the UK,
yeah. Well,
sites, effectively.
Looking at different sites.
Facilities.
We also need to, we're assessing what that change of policy in the UK has for us at the moment, because they're only doing that hospital testing, whereas we know for us that is not where we should be. We're in containment. We still believe we're in containment, but the UK is in delay. And so what we are trying to do is keep us in containment for as long as possible. So that impact, we not knowing what that change in policy that impact has on us is another reason why we're looking at bringing forward the end of term.
And for kids who won't be going to school, is there any advice or guidance on them socialising? Are they going to be expected to stay home?
We will be issuing more guidance on that tomorrow, because we are conscious that we hear with stories of children being taken off school because they've got odd sniffle and then they're running around within the beau de jour. Indeed, we need to give guidance on what that actually means. At the same time, and I think it's really important I say this, what we can do So all this is always sounding like you can't do this and we're closing that. We really want to turn it around the other way and say, look, we've got to look at people's mental health. How can we do things differently? What can we do in terms of going outside, getting exercise? What is allowed and isn't? I think people are still unsure. We don't want people to feel so claustrophobic in the situation we're in. It's all about being proportionate, and I think that extra guidance will come out tomorrow. I think Nikki is doing a lot about that approach that we can take.
Can I also just clarify, so are you still testing but aware there is a backlog, or are you just stopping
No,
testing?
we're still testing at the moment, and that's why as of the end of today there'll be over 70. We will hopefully get some results in later today, but we still have more tests outstanding than I'm comfortable with to sit here and say, yes, I'm happy we're in containment. It may well be that all of those tests come back negative and we are able to bring in our on-island testing, which we can then have very rapid responsive testing. That puts us in a different risk profile. And I think that's really important. So if we had testing on island, we'd be able to look at situations, assess them really quickly and respond appropriately.
Just to add to the testing, I mean, the staff behind the scenes have really been busting a gut here to get that equipment online, find ways that we can do training quickly, making sure that we get all the bits of kit in place, Path Lab all set up really expeditiously. I mean, that they have bringing down those weeks. I mean, as Nikki says, this is normally something that takes 3-4 months indeed to actually put in, but they're really thinking about how can we do this for the purposes that we need it for now. And so hopefully we're shortening that time so we can get in local testing sooner rather than later, because then we'll be masters of our own destiny far more than we are at the moment.
And also really important to emphasise that development of on-island capacity was a decision that was taken quite a few weeks ago. It's not something that's happened in the last few days or the last week or so. This was taken many weeks ago, and it's just a question of the time that's required to execute and deliver that. So we absolutely have not been tardy in seeking to develop our own on-island capacity.
Yeah, and I understand that the other piece of equipment we were waiting for has been built now and is ready to be transported. So, yeah, if we hadn't done that, we would be nowhere at the moment. So that planning early on, at the onset of all this, has really made a difference.
Okay, next question.
So how long are the test results actually taking at the moment?
Nikki?
At least 3 days. So that's the situation we're in at the moment. I'm aware of some people waiting 4 days, and I can only apologise because I think it's immensely frustrating for them, and it's obviously impacts on our ability to do our jobs efficiently. So it is a concern, and that's one of the parts of the decision making. It's firstly the number of tests that are outstanding, but secondly the time that's taking for us to get results. So both of those are impacting on our ability to operate fast.
Does that extend to, because some people have just said that they're waiting 10 days, does that extend to them?
I haven't heard of anyone waiting 10 days for a result, I have to say.
We've had a few messages, so some have said there's been 8 days and 10 days, but is that not true?
I would have to look into, I can't really comment on individual cases, I'd have to look into that. That hasn't been brought to my attention, but I'll take that on board and get further information on that.
Okay, question right at the back.
How can you ensure people who are coming back to the island are self-isolating, and how can you enforce that if they're not?
I think it's probably a question for you, Rory, if you don't mind.
Yes, I think it's like any situation like this. I think the vast majority of people, when given the correct information, and that's been something that this island has really focused on, when given the correct information, will comply. The legislation will be adopted in a progressive way and a proportionate way, and it will be, if we receive information that someone who is in isolation isn't complying, there will be an approach primarily from public health initially, and if further steps have to be taken, well, it then may mean that law enforcement have to become involved. But our strategy at the moment is to make sure everyone has the right information and that we do everything we can to get people to understand why they have to follow the isolation rules. So the actual enforcement aspect, we sincerely hope will maybe not ever be used, but if it has to, it is there. And we suspect that most people in our community get this is about keeping their loved ones, their friends and families safe, and that they will, for those reasons, comply.
If I can just build on that point, of course, the carriers are being very helpful. They are ensuring that anybody who is about to travel is aware of that before they travel, in terms of their websites and communications with passengers and potential passengers. They're making announcements, again at our request, on the vessels and aircraft before individuals land, and then you'll also have sight of the effectively the landing card, which each passenger will be required to complete, which obviously gives details about who they are. And we're also looking at other ways in which we can help colleagues at both public health and law enforcement, if required, in terms of being able to identify where people are and what they're doing.
Yeah. I was just going to add to that. We're looking at other means that we can ensure that people are self-isolating, various technology options, members of the community providing ideas about how we can do that, which we really welcome and we're taking forward.
And again, the opportunity to mention any ideas in the public, any suggestions at all, COVID-19 inquiries with an E at the beginning, at gov.gg. COVID-19 inquiries at gov.gg. We're receiving the single point for all suggestions, and that is then being triaged, and ideas are being taken forward as they deserve merit.
Just picking up from one thing from Tuesday, you said about if the schools had to shut, 50% of nurses would be affected by that. How does this affect the health service moving forward?
Yeah, I think, as I said in opening, there does clearly need to be consideration given to and provision made for the childcare of key workers. And that, again, is something that is now being worked on today, with further announcements tomorrow. So the message, we wanted to again give as much advance notice as to all parents of the decision, so that they can make provision where they're able to from Monday, but also to say that there will be further information in relation to key workers, and obviously who is a key worker and so on needs to be thought about as well. So as early as information is available, it will be made available.
What about those who wouldn't be considered key workers? What kind of support can you offer them, the parents who perhaps are having to take time off work and their contracts or employers might not allow for that?
Well, I think we have to, and that's why we're not rushing to say everything that we're going to do now. All those things have been considered. We're considering more vulnerable children in the community, children who might be struggling to get a decent meal at the start of the day, how we can make sure that those children aren't lost in all this. It's really been something that we've focused quite a bit on actually today, talking about we must ensure that this is fair for everybody. And so, but we don't want to rush and say what those things are now. It's important that we know that people know the direction we're going for next week, but now and then we can then give everybody that detail tomorrow.
But parents who don't fit into that key workers category.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for the children that don't fit into those special areas, they essentially have 4 days to make arrangements for their jobs, for their work, and not all employers will be sympathetic towards that. Can you offer them some kind of support?
I think we can't sugarcoat where we are. I mean, this global pandemic is having major impacts on every society, every community, and every individual. So yes, there will be impact on family life, and how that situation is adjusted to. I think we have to keep using this phrase of adjusting to some kind of new normality, whilst we're going through this pandemic. We will emerge to proper normality in due course, but we're some way off from that. And so no, I'm afraid I can't pretend that there won't be impact on individuals and families, and indeed a knock-on impact on employers in terms of how they provide for that and so on. I'm afraid.
So we hope in this situation, and we'd say Guernsey together, that people are working together and they'll be understanding of each other's circumstances and will help each other out. But we need to, and this is what the message we're trying to get across. It's the States of Guernsey can't do all this. It's a whole community that needs to work together here.
One more question about testing. When we can test on island, how quickly do those tests turn around before you get a result?
Oh, we would hope to do it on the same day. So really quickly, we're looking at 2 testing strategies. One which would be a 24-hour one, particularly for our inpatients. And with that, it's really important because there's also a global shortage of personal protective equipment. So actually what we could do, if we could get a test within an hour, it would enable us to then either isolate the person or not. These are people requiring hospital admission. And then for the general community testing, I would hope the same day or the next day, but fundamentally different. It puts us in a completely different ballgame. And just to go on to the query that was asked about schools, one of the reasons why it's a pause and assess is that if we get a really good testing policy, we could move to more a Singapore type of situation where you have really rapid detection, good contact tracing, and you actually control using testing as a centre of your control. It's the unknown that we're faced with today that's causing us concern.
Okay, next question.
I just wanted to touch on Singapore. You mentioned it on Tuesday and you mentioned it today. How important is it for you to look at what other countries are doing, particularly an island like Singapore? But also, our strategy seems to be slightly different from Jersey. How much are you communicating between each other?
I mean, there's a lot of communication between Jersey and ourselves on a whole range of issues, and of course, not least at the public health level. I'm not going to speak to their decision making. That really is a matter for them, and equally, indeed, any other jurisdiction. The reference to Singapore is simply was to find a jurisdiction that had already been further through this process than we had, but it was adopting a similar strategy to us. So again, our own decisions won't be the same as Singapore's, and we're now seeing that in relation to the current decision in relation to bringing forward the Easter holiday, which wasn't something they needed to do because they had a greater capacity for testing. So the key message we've had all along through this is we will make judgments that are appropriate and proportionate for Guernsey's situation at any given time during the progression of this disease in our community. And those decisions will not be the same as any other jurisdiction on the same given day. So the fact that something else happens somewhere else today doesn't mean we're going to adopt it tomorrow. And if we're in a position, as Nikki has said, with confidence to be able to bring forward the school term again, then that's what we will do. And it doesn't really matter what's going on in Jersey or anywhere else. I think it is really important that we understand the approach is to do what's right for us. And I think it has always been the precautionary approach. So we would not be doing this. Let's be very clear. Based on up to this point, we would not be taking this measure if it wasn't for the constraint on testing resources. And this balance between maintaining a normal life for as many people as we can, for as long as we can, is a really important objective. Not only for the physical and mental health of individuals and the sense of community, for economic life, all of these reasons are important, but also from facing the challenge which Rory and his team will have. If we lock down the community to the dramatic extent some other jurisdictions have done, and we do it too early, before we are anywhere close to the peak of this for this community, it's going to create a real challenge around enforcement as weeks go by and people wonder why on earth that this has happened. They may, in the first instance, think, oh, that's great, Guernsey's authorities have taken a big, bold decision, but when they're still sitting at home watching television, wondering why, in a few weeks' time, they may not be so appreciative. So it's getting that balance, and that balance will always be informed by the evidence and by the advice, but ultimately it is a judgment.
Going back to the police, you said they were taking extra precautions to being at the borders and not to risk getting unwell. And also, what in a wider scheme, like the nurses, there are going to be parents who work in the police force. What sort of scale are you looking at to make sure that you keep enough staff working and people out on the beat?
Yeah, like any organisation, we'll look at demand. We may look at ways of trying to reduce demand. We may have to reduce some of our back office work and bring staff to help the front line. There will certainly be some adjustments that have got to be made across our workforce. I know that, as in any organisation, as one of your colleagues raised, people have children and have elderly relatives. It's exactly the same for health workers, for law enforcement, for all public servants who are dealing with this situation. So we will have to work with our staff, and we will have to probably work on staffing levels that, as this situation develops, may be quite challenging. But we have an excellent workforce, and I know that they will help support keep the key functions within our organisation running across the bailiwick.
And the specifics at the airport, you said that they would be doing special precautions to mitigate. What is that?
Well, it's things like contact. For example, some of the counters, we've put precautions that members of the public who attend don't stand right up next to the counters. And it's just very basic health precautions. So we want the public to realise we are 100% open for business, but it might be in a slightly different way, and not to be alarmed by that.
Next question, please.
Are you able to give any update on GCSEs and A-levels following this announcement and the UK's decision yesterday?
You will have seen that the Committee for Education, Sport and Culture have put out a press release on that today. I mean, clearly, again, in that situation, our education service is a user of the provider of those exams outside the island. So really, we are going to be dependent on developments elsewhere. So I'm afraid I don't think any of us are in a position to give more information on that here at this briefing today. I think what I would say, in respect of all of those who are impacted by that decision, whether it's GCSEs, A-levels, those indeed taking the university finals, and indeed a whole raft of other exams, I think we must all feel their frustration and despair at the sense of just anxiety about what impact it will have on them, how they're going to be treated, whether they get, and so on. So again, this is one of the sort of mental health and well-being issues we have to think about as a community. That's a big cohort of our community who are suffering stress. I think one of the other things that has occurred to me in the last 24 hours or so is the whole community, I guess the whole globe, but our concern is clearly for the bailiwicks community. The whole community is experiencing real stress and anxiety. I mean, it would be bizarre if individuals weren't, and managing that at a community level is a real challenge. We will all have, every single one of us in this room will have our own concern for individuals who we know, whether it's friends or family, and how this could touch them. I think that comes back to the Guernsey Together and us recognising that in each other and owning this as a community challenge, and again reinforcing the responsibility that every single one of us has to each other, even if we've never met each other.
Yeah, and I think to those students, they might feel that it's only them, but there's lots of people impacted by this, and I know certainly from the UK they're working out how people can be assessed to go to university. Just this morning I was hearing that the universities were saying how we can make sure that we don't lose a whole term. So I think for those students and young people, it's such a difficult time for them, and they put so much effort into the work to make sure that they get a good grade and for their future. But they're not alone in it, and work is being done through loads of people to make sure that they can continue in their future careers, for their future education as soon as possible.
Going back to the hospital, in parts of the preparation for once you get beyond the containment stage, what position are you at in terms of bringing in more ventilators at the moment, and how many do you have on island, and have you got a bit of a plan of when you can expect more to arrive?
So the medical director can give a fuller briefing on this, but we have plans as to how we can optimise the use of the ventilators we've got. For example, not doing elective procedures, using our ventilators from theatre and so on. We also have a plan for making a particular area a COVID high dependency unit. So all of that's in process, and there's very advanced planning for that. The actual details of that has been worked on by the medical director, and we're hoping that he will join us for one of the future briefings.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just
Yes.
lastly.
Sorry, there's one. Sorry, one behind you first, if you don't mind. Sorry.
I know there's been a lot of support for the Guernsey Press's initiative to get the community involved in support. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it, really.
Brilliant. It's what it's about. Absolutely what it's about. And I've been heartened by the number. I mean, I've had loads of emails and texts and from people saying, what about this? It's great. That's why we set up COVID-19 inquiries at gov.gg so it can be channelled through that way. But I think Guernsey Press Initiative is absolutely fantastic. I think all the media that can help in different ways here, and you're helping now by streaming this and making sure that people know what's going on. But that's what it is about, and that's what we really need.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't put it better myself. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And I'm sure we will see more of this, and particularly the initiatives around those who are self-isolating, those who may not have as much support. Some families may not have as much support, or individuals as others. As I say, and I think we've got to constantly think about how that's going to need to adjust over the coming weeks, but because of this enormous change in behaviours for us all as individuals and how it's going to impact us. So I think one of the things that is going to help us get through this is that sense of community, those kind of ideas. It all makes us get up and feel we can face the day when we've got ideas such as that. So it's great.
On communications infrastructure in the island, we already know there's a lot of pressure on broadband, internet access, that kind of thing. That's already been heightened, and there's a limit to what can actually be provided here. How worried are you about the extra pressure that sending these young people, children, out of school back to their homes will actually put on communication, especially given that one of the thoughts is that more services will be provided online right through the day across the community now. Do you think the island infrastructure can cope?
I don't think I'm in a position to comment on that.
No, but I do know work is being done through education, obviously, to work out how work can be done at home, and those considerations will be taken into account in terms of what they can do online.
I don't know whether Mark or Paul, you're able to comment on either than that at all.
Yeah, as Mark's already pointed out, actually, we have worked with the telcos to increase, which that's happening, and we have a specific group of people looking at how we can use technology and enhancements of technologies, but also what can we cope with, because it's a really good question about you can pile on all these initiatives and that, but can actually the system cope with it? So what things might we switch off to enable more community support and energy changes, for example, in education? That's being looked at as we speak.
Just whilst we're talking about the telcos and the adoption of ideas and the rapid adoption of ideas, again, I want to pay tribute to the networks who, many of you will have received an SMS text message yesterday, which was sent through the networks, which is a technology which is available for in these kind of situations. And I think that idea we discussed at 2:30, and the first messages went out at 5 o'clock. And I think that really shows the engagement of everybody to make things happen at a speed which, in normal circumstances might take weeks or months. So I think there was a question in the middle.
I was just going to say, we've talked about this as some of the toughest times we'll have faced since the occupation. Yeah. Should we be adopting sort of wartime messages, keep calm, carry on, it's going to be all right?
Well, I certainly hope very much that I've done that. I'm really glad you've given me the cue or to do so again. No, absolutely. This is, as I've said before, we will get through this as a community. We are immensely resilient. This community is coming up to the 75th anniversary of the occupation, which lasted 5 years, a lot longer than the experience we're now about to go through, whether it's weeks or several months or longer. We don't know, but it's so we know as a community that's lived through that experience, it is going to come through this. And I think one of the key messages we've been trying to deliver is everything we are doing is about building confidence that people can go about this new normal life, that they can go out and shop normally and participate in community life, and particularly in open spaces. Of course, people do not have to stay indoors if they want to go for a walk, and if they participate in non-contact sports, so long as they understand and follow the very clear public health advice in relation to social distancing, then life does not need to stop. So absolutely, it is about keep calm. It's keep calm and have confidence that we have this. We've had a plan for a long time. We're executing that plan. We're flexing that plan as we have done today in response to changed circumstances, and we will change it and flex it again. But let's all work together, and we will come out the other side. And we've going to have some significant economic and financial challenges for our economy as well, and that's being worked on as well.
Just to go back to sport, just to reiterate, if it's okay, Nikki, that as long as you're not showing signs and symptoms, you can do these sort of non-contact outside sports, and in fact, I imagine that would be encouraged for people to get out and about.
Absolutely. We want the community to remain resilient and to remain healthy, and we realise that we're in challenging and difficult times to do that, but we all need to be as healthy as we can. So, going out, if you're healthy and have no symptoms, go out for a walk. But just don't stop and have a half an hour face-to-face conversation, with someone. So it's that type of common sense type of thing, is get out, communicate through social media, communicate through other means, and try and keep yourselves fit and healthy.
I think that's why we're asking for ideas. People got other things that we can do, and we can give advice and say, yeah, cycling will be great, going for a jog. If you're fit, you've got no symptoms, just continue doing that. But the members of the public, we've got brilliant ideas coming through, things that can we do that we can actually make happen across the bailiwick.
There are, just in relation to that question, I mean, there are 63,000 individuals on the island. We can't make all the decisions for every individual on the island that is appropriate for their set of circumstances. Individuals do have to take responsibility for what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, and so on. But what we can do is provide very clear advice so that they are informed and can make an informed decision. If they've got doubts, then there are routes to find out more information. But absolutely follow official advice. Don't follow some garbage on social media, particularly if it's come from outside the island, because it won't. It has no application. Look at gov.gg and //coronavirus. Look at all the information there. Make your decision based on that advice. And if you're still unsure, follow the links, follow the phone numbers to get further advice, and then make your judgment, then make your decision. Then we can keep calm and carry on.
I think that's really important to follow that advice, the gov.gg, coronavirus, listen to these live streams, take the information from the media release, all that. That's where the information comes from. People will see, and it can cause confusion and concern when you see national UK news, even sister islands and further afield. But just listen to what Nikki Brink and her team are saying from public health advice, and get all the information about what we need to do for Guernsey, because it's all about being Guernsey together.
On the testing and the delays, I still feel a little bit uneasy about this idea that we couldn't have foreseen the pressure that there would be on these testing labs in the UK. Is that something that we should have predicted, or has there been some kind of change in arrangement that has caused these delays?
I think it's important to understand here, it's not just about the delays in testing, because we knew we had some delays in testing yesterday, but the UK have changed their policy in terms of testing, and we don't know how that will impact us. If they're only testing within a hospital setting, that really changes the landscape from what we are doing at the moment. So testing a group of people from travelling from outside the island. Just that change overnight has led to delays in themselves. Might not have been such an issue, but it's given us so much more uncertainty. So yes, delays, and that's led to the nervousness, but it is in combination with that change in UK policy, and we need to understand what that means for us.
So that's been a key stimulus yesterday's.
Absolutely, yeah.
Any further final questions?
Just a very quick numbers check. You said there are 300 calls at the moment coming into the Joint Emergency Response Centre. What's like a typical normal amount?
It depends if there's a specific event or a specific change in advice. They do tend to go up. But if I was thinking sort of ballpark figures, it's around 200 a day. But when there are specific changes or new announcements about how we would ask people to respond, we do get an increase. But it's continuing to be staffed, and it's available for any member of the public who wants to seek the appropriate advice.
I just wanted to pick up on something that you mentioned earlier about further measures at possibly pubs and clubs.
Yep.
What would you actually be considering?
Well, that's what we'll be telling you tomorrow.
So what we really want, the key message today is to say that it's something that is under active consideration. No decisions have been made, but it is something that is being considered.
It's just on the back of the fact that we've had to take these precautionary measures because of change in policy and the delays. We don't know whether we've got community seeding. We need to be, because of that, we need to be more cautious. So we need to think of those further measures that could ensure that we are matching that caution with the position we're in at the moment.
In other words, does it cause us, give us cause to change the social distancing advice? And if so, how does it impact on certain locations? And that's something, again, which needs to be given time to allow that proper advice to be worked up so that decisions can be made. Any other question? We haven't talked a great deal today about the economy and the impact on the economy, and I'm sure that will become an issue in the days and weeks ahead. But I think this is a good opportunity again to deliver a message to the community about that in terms of, again, what we can do apart from the keep calm and carry on to the extent that you can in accordance with advice, and therefore keep shopping locally and so on. I think there are other things that we can all do in terms of supporting local business. There are some that, of course, are where something may be cancelled. If you're given the option to have a cash refund or perhaps get credit that you can use later, please consider allowing yourself to receive the credit so that we can maintain the cash in some of those businesses. Orani, for example, is giving that option to passengers who are needing to cancel in the weeks ahead. It's those sorts of things. We just need to be considerate and think, okay, how can we help each other out? How can we help to ease the burden, the economic and financial burden that there will be as a consequence of this medical crisis?
Just quickly,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, off the back of that, we've had a not huge amount of people we've asked, but we've already had some people say that they're not sure if the financial measures are going to go far enough. Is that a feedback that you've already got a sense of, and if so, is that something you're reviewing next week, that maybe you're bringing more measures?
Yeah, again, I'm not going to say we've got a timeline on reviewing it, because we haven't. But what I will say is, as indeed I said yesterday, it is an initial series of measures. I was asked yesterday whether 5 million in the hardship fund was enough, and I said, well, the only honest answer I can give is I haven't got a clue. It quite frankly was a number that we picked from the air, and really to kick the thing off, and really to show intent. It's difficult, it's very difficult at this stage to say what the scale of intervention is going to be required. But again, that is a whole separate work stream, which is engaging a whole different group of people, working with industries and different sectors, looking at the consequences, working out how we can help. But again, the key message was we understand the problem. We are going to step in. We are going to help. Again, we're not going to be able to solve every single problem, but there are steps we can take. And as with the whole public health scene, on the financial and economic scene, we will continue to flex and adapt. So we don't have all the answers now, we won't have them all next week, but we will continue to adapt and change as we need to. Well, I think that's probably enough for today. Thank you very much again for all your time, and I'm sure we will see you again sooner rather than later. Thank you.